SOCWED, we can introduce, everyone can introduce themselves, and we'll pass it off to Alicia. So I'm Mike Marcotte, State Representative from Coventry, Chair House Commerce and Economic Development, and also Chair of the SOCWED. And Allison?
Allison Clarkson, Senator, Vice Chair, Senate Economic Development, and fan of workforce development. Jay.
All right, good afternoon. Jay Ramsey, now officially the Director of Workforce Development at the Department of Labor. Adam?
Congratulations, Mike. Hello, everyone. Adam Grinold. I'm the Executive Director of Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation, the Wyndham Region RDC, and Chair of the statewide board. Kendall.
Good afternoon, Kendall Smith, Governor Scott's Director of Policy and Legislative Affairs.
We'll leave it to you now, Alicia.
Okay,
And
great.
you-
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Alicia Ordway. I'm here on behalf of Public Consulting Group, but also our team of assembled workforce experts from across the country. I think, let's see, I'll invite people to just introduce themselves. Does that make sense? So from ICF, Mel. Or maybe while Mel gets situated, Mike.
Good afternoon. Mel's working on that to get on board. This is Mike Lawrence from ICF, Senior Workforce Director and longtime workforce guy. So looking forward to our meeting. Thank you. Mel?
There, I'm back. Mel Arsenal. I'm a Senior Workforce Consultant with ICF. And you can see I'm sitting in my car in Portsmouth. So.
Okay, in transit. And then from the PCG team, we have Nancy.
Hi, everyone. Nancy Snyder, workforce consultant, been doing this for many years. Nice to meet you. Good. I met you before. Nice to see you. Look forward to the meeting.
Already.
We're here. Okay, Candace.
Hi, Candace Finney, PCG Director of Operations in the workforce subject area.
And Ryan.
Ryan Lechak, consultant with PCG.
Awesome.
Okay, so I think the next piece on the agenda is to review and approve the agenda. So for the SOCWED, motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Okay, is there a second?
Second. Do we need a second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion's approved. So review and approve the minutes of the April 10th meeting. I think those were distributed by Abby. Motion to approve the minutes of the April 10th meeting.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion's carried. So the next piece is early thoughts on peer, region, and state comparisons. So Alicia will get it off, send it off to you.
Awesome. Thank you. So just wanted to provide, today's a status update meeting. I wanted to give you a sense of where we are. Okay, so here are the 4 things that we'd like to cover with you today. Just review the timeline again, because a couple of things have slipped a little bit. Talk about the phase 1 report at a very high level. Talk about the implications for the national review, and then think through a little bit about how we can approach the working session planned for June. So here's where we are right now, and we've taken a little bit more time to complete the phase 1 Vermont study, of which you should have received a draft copy at the end of the day on Friday. What we'd like to do, rather than kind of hash, because it's a lengthy document and there's a lot of content there, what we'd like to do is follow up with you, each member of the SOCWED individually, discuss, get your feedback, and then close that, say, wrap that up by May 24th and just say that piece is done for sure. Because I think, we've gathered a lot of information, a lot of different perspectives. And while I think we have critical mass in terms of understanding that'll enable us to pivot to the next phase, which is thinking about the development of the three options, the three recommended options for the state. So right now, we have a working session scheduled for early June, and a target of, I'm proposing here that we submit to you draft recommendations by June 30th. I think originally we had the end of May, early June as the target date, but I think we'll be back on track if we give you those recommendations by the end of June, and then we have something already scheduled on the calendar for early July. I believe it's July 10th. So that then we can process those recommendations, revise the documents as needed, and then still meet the final deliverable date of September 1st.
May I just ask a question? Our June 5th meeting, that's a Monday, I assume.
Yep.
Yikes. Can you just remind us what time we're meeting, and are we meeting in person here at the State House? I thought we were.
I'll defer to Abby on the specific location of the logistics, but yeah, it is an early after.
I believe we have it currently booked from 12 to 2. And I think we were just still up in the air about whether or not it's going to be in person or not, but are we able to use Representative Marcotte's room, or we haven't confirmed what room we're going to be in?
Room we wanted. Hopefully none of us will be here. So I think we could either use economic development or commerce. Either way. So we're doing it sort of over lunch.
We have it right now for 12 to 2 scheduled.
Okay.
On June 5th.
Right. Terrific. Thanks. Sorry, I just, said June 5th and I just couldn't remember the time.
No, it's definitely. Okay, so we're a little bit of slippage, but I think we're okay. I think we have ample time to address and whatever gaps and move forward. So just by way of reminder, what you should see here are those elements that we have been talking about in terms of the components of the workforce system and lenses upon which to think about and discuss changes to the system. Governance, alignment, service delivery, accountability, and infrastructure, sort of the five anchors, if you will. And so, I'll follow up with each of you individually to find a time conducive to processing the report. But I just, for the sake of conversation today, just want to lift up that there are some key themes that I think will be important to take into consideration as we look at other areas for comparison. So one, I think a couple of assumptions, right, is that the consensus is that these high vacancy rates are ultimately not good for the Vermont economy, and that, it does pose a risk in terms of whether businesses innovate, automate, outsource, what have you, but that, and those are in sectors where they can, and there are some sectors where you don't have the luxury of necessarily outsourcing, and these will all be potentially problematic. The second area is that, what we heard from everyone is that even if the Vermont develops the most efficient and effective system for talent development, there still remains the ultimate challenge of just getting more people into the work or earning wages in the state and contributing to the overall labor market. The third thing that I want to highlight that I think we maybe underemphasized in our last discussion with you all is that even since we've been engaged, there's been a very dynamic process happening in the background with the State Workforce Board. And hopefully you'll see that addressed more clearly in the new draft. And I think what's exciting about what Tori and Abby are doing is that there's really a marshaling of engagement. Oh, Candace fell off. Rebecca, that there's a lot of marshaling of strategies and ideas to address a lot of things that we heard as themes in our stakeholder interview and even at first glance at looking at the documents. So I think there's a lot of momentum in that direction, and whatever next set of models that get discussed in this configuration has to take that into consideration clearly, but also think about where sort of the top down and the bottom up get integrated and meet in the middle to develop a system that people are bought into and that's running smoothly. Yes, Adams.
Sure. Are you, well, I may have interrupted you purely. Number 5 on the slide, just had a question about that, but if you're not there yet, apologize.
No, go for it.
Sure. So when this reads accountable for organizing resources that contribute, what is that intended to convey? Is that
what's intended by that?
Like money, or is this where the dollars come into play for this, or is this more holistic, just trying to organize folks to all be aligned within the system?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I'm sorry, your connection was breaking up a little bit, so I'm going to do my best. I think what I heard you say is for number 5, is that just about money, or are there other things in play there?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So I think it's both. I think it's both and. I think it's this dynamic of making investments that will allow for foundational service delivery, but also ensure that results happen that both and.
Okay. Thank you.
Jay.
And I guess related to that one, for any federal funds that we receive as a state, there are accountability measures that come with those. So
sure.
I think we want to be a little cautious around what we mean with this, because if we don't meet federal measures, we have to have improvement plans that come with them. So I think it's about communicating to the public and to the new system what it is that we intend to do to address whatever deficiency the federal government may notice in our metrics.
Absolutely. And I think this goes back to number 3 too, and thinking about the dynamics and how there are federal funds that are flowing in a variety of different categories that have their own set of accountability measures, but at the same time looking holistically, whether it be at the region or looking at a population, that there's opportunities to see whether or not, for example, I don't know, the needle is being moved on, I'll take something like high school graduation, because that's not really here, right? I mean, there's lots of things that are in play that keep young people in school and all the way to graduation. Same could be said for workforce, right? There's lots of resources that are in play. How do you ultimately move that needle on the health overall for Vermont? So I think that's really what I was trying to get at there, and that can be looked at the macro level across the whole state, or even just down to the regional level.
Okay.
No, thanks. These are good questions. And again, this is the kind of, like, to Jay's point, I think we're looking for your input on that first draft, or not the first, but the draft of sort of the Vermont analysis, and just saying like, okay, do we hit the right tones, or do we need to tweak some of the language to accommodate for some of those things, as Jay mentioned. Cool. Any other, and I invite folks who were part of our process of interviewing and reviewing, if there's anything else that you want to offer in terms of sort of really say, I tried to keep the list kind of short and high level, but I invite others who've been part of the process, if there's other things that you want to share. Nancy, Candace, Mel, Mike, any of you guys? Yes, Jay.
Sorry, one more thought. The governor's administration has a strategic plan that includes lots of different metrics, and I'm just thinking, is there a way for us to latch on to some of those if they're data points that we already collect that are organized in a meaningful way? I don't think we should have a whole set of separate things for the workforce development system. These systems all need to be feeding into each other. And I will put that in the chat.
Definitely. And I think when we get to some of the other examples, I'm going to invite, once we get to some of the specifics, maybe Nancy, you can talk about sort of the reconciliation at the executive level of administrative priority, gubernatorial priorities, and how they can sometimes additional measures get reconciled across secretariats, for example, to Jay's point, because I hear you. There's like formative measures on the way to sort of community-wide accountability. Mike? Mike, I think you have your hand up. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I do. I don't know how to put it down, but it's still up. I'll just add to what Jay said. You know, it's really nice to look at all those measures and kind of add them up to see what's a good job. You know, looking at those, we want to kind of get a feel for that, because as we go back to each of our communities, you know, I always talk to my board about these eyes glaze over moments. So sometimes when I talk to my board about the fourth quarter, such and such on this kind of measure, they would look at me and say, can't you just put it in normal words? So, you know, it's our job as a technician to make sure we meet those standards, because, you know, that's where the money comes from. But I think as we look at all those, it can give us a great idea of what are the right jobs for the right people in the right place. So good, that was a good comment. I'll look forward to looking at that plan. So thank you.
Any other thoughts or comments about sort of these high level takeaways that I think, obviously these are not the end all be all, but just sort of a couple of anchors, I think, for us as we move to the next phase. So as we were discussing what we were seeing and hearing and reading about Vermont, you know, there were it's not to say that these phases have clear beginning and end points. And so along the way, through the exploration, you know, examples of things that we had encountered in other places seemed relevant. And so maybe this is where we can start to just share some of those examples for discussion. So for example, around this point of governance, to your point, Jay, I'd invite Nancy to talk a little bit about, you know, the nuts and bolts about how a skills cabinet might integrate multiple strategic priorities to create a coherent system for all, you know, for all involved.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I'm most familiar with the skills cabinet in Massachusetts, but I think as we look at states with you know, the sort of states that we want to examine more carefully, looking for other models of this. But the skills cabinet is really a place where the chief executive of a secretariat or a department, depending on how you're organized, those chief executives across education, workforce, and labor, economic development, health and human services, come together on a regular basis and develop a shared vision, strategies, goals, and priorities across their cabinets. So you're really figuring out, what are the fights we want to take on here? How do we coordinate our efforts at a statewide level to do that? But also this begins to do that kind of top-down, bottom-up approach that Alicia talked about a little earlier, where you then replicate that at a regional level, where the regional bodies that represent those cabinets also come together and establish regional priorities, regional strategies, regional goals, where they're really looking at how do you aggregate and align demand and supply so that you're developing strategies, partnerships that really have an impact in terms of being able to meet the demand that a region has, particularly around priority sectors. And a lot of that work is really determining what are those priority sectors, what are the kind of inputs that we have to addressing workforce challenges in those priority sectors, and how do we do a better job of aligning, coordinating, and keeping one another accountable. And I think at the same time, it builds a set of relationships where people trust each other enough to really begin to kind of share thinking, vulnerabilities, and a more openness to approaching things a little differently and a little bit more collaboratively, so that you really are leveraging all of the resources that you have toward a set of shared priorities. And I think that setting those priorities is really important in this example. So so that's just one model of how to do that. And in Vermont, that could be you know, a sort of high level committee of the workforce board, where it's all of the internal players who are kind of coming together regularly to really set that agenda and then hold one another accountable around that agenda.
Thanks. See, and I saw, Adam, you made the comment about the skills summits, right? And I think the trick at this point is, you know, in this juncture of the evolution of the system is, you know, what's the structure that sustains those summits over time and activity in between. And I think one of the things I've come to appreciate having talked to so many people is that so many people play different roles in the community, and that you don't want to replicate something or duplicate something if the conversations are happening in a different way. So I think how we look at the funding stream, the relationship structures to institutionalize those summits so that they, you know, persist over time and are afforded the time to have activity and traction on some of those goals and visions and goals that Nancy was talking about, is something that we would want to examine and see how do other places of similar population size or of similar, you know, degrees of rural population, what does it look like in some of those other states?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those summits did a really great job of the sort of getting information up to the state, where what they weren't driven by the state leadership or state policy. So they were sort of each of them was finding a way under the terms of the RFP, but with a good centralized workforce board and priority, as you say in the committee, that then will go out to those regions and pull that information back up.
Yeah.
And really get a two-way conversation. I think would be amazing.
Yeah, and I think that regional approach also helps to identify what the assets are in a region. And again, you know, with really clear priorities, you begin to recognize what you can build from in a region and leverage. And when you're trying to sort of be all things to all people, I think sometimes it's really hard for those assets to shine. And so it can also be an opportunity, you know, to really figure out what are the institutions and systems that you can really build from as you're developing shared strategies.
So if I may jump in, we had this. I mean, we had a whole regional system of workforce boards around the state. And Nancy, I don't know if you knew that. They haven't existed for a few years, but it's sort of like reinventing what we already had. I wasn't involved with them at that time. I know Jim Maslin served on one in the Upper Valley. Mike, do you know about them? Adam, you must know about them. Jay must know about them. I mean, we already had this.
I would make a distinction between having regional workforce boards and having a shared regional strategy. Now, I will say the workforce boards often play a critical role around convening at that regional level, bringing education. Education ends up being very important, economic development, et cetera, to the table.
I guess I'm just curious why they failed. I mean, because they seem essential and a critical piece to feeding whatever governance structure we end up creating, they clearly are eyes and ears locally or regionally. Well, why did they fail? I mean, why did we disband them? Does Adam or Jay or Mike know why? I mean, because
you got a lot of hands on that one, Senator.
Good, because I don't know the answer. So I'm
Yeah.
glad 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people do.
Should we go in order? I guess that looks, if we take the numbers as the time at which they flashed their hands up, it looks like Cameron was first.
Yeah, real quick, and for the record, Cameron Wood, Policy and Legislative Director for the Department of Labor. I don't have the answer as to why they failed. If someone thinks that they failed in the sense of that word, I just wanted to remind the SOCWED committee that as this, if this moves forward, there's the distinction of what is required under the Federal Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act and the potential of creating local boards under that federal legislation. And I would kind of point you back to the presentation that Sarah Buxton gave, many, many months ago about creating local boards under that framework is not something that the Department of Labor would recommend, because it, creates a lot of federal oversight, bureaucratic nightmare, and we can deep dive in that if the committee wants to, again, at a later date. So I'm not saying that that's what's being proposed here. I just want to make sure that if, that moves forward in some sort of manner in that way, keeping in mind that we do have to fit a square peg in the round hole with our federal WIOA program requirements and what that means. Would they fall under that? Would we want to go down that road, or would they live and exist outside of the federal system? In which case, where's the oversight, who funds it, et cetera, et cetera. That was going to be my only point.
Gotcha. Jay?
And I think picking up off of what Cameron was saying, we have to have the statewide workforce development board. We also have at the local level the regional advisory boards for the tech centers. That serves one role. There are Weber offices that serve another role. Their business account managers are engaging with business and industry. And then, outside of that, there's probably some other local or regional organizations. And then outside of that is probably some other, the state colleges have their systems. And so I think, what we're trying to do here is rethink all of those. Do all of these structures need to exist? And we know that the same people are attending the same meetings because we're a small state, and people serve multiple roles within the workforce development system, and they have to attend all of these meetings. So if we weren't all attending multiple meetings representing the same perspective, could we get more done? Is, maybe a thought. But I keep coming back to what's the regional advisory boards do. We have WIBLETs in certain areas of the state that are still active. They're still doing things. And then the regional development corporations all operate slightly differently. Brattleboro is focused on some things that some others aren't. And, is there a defined role that those organizations would play? I think this is all grist for the mill, as it were.
Exactly. And I think there's opportunity for us to, just before Adam jumps on, to comment. I think that was all that we were trying to say is, when we look at Idaho, how are they bringing together their career? A lot of these resources are consistent. Are there examples in other places where we can see that they've blended some of them that we can use as an example? Definitely not trying to create another system. Adam?
So to get to the question, why did they fail or did they fail? I think the issue that I've heard explained to me on the decision making behind the removal of annual funding for them was that it had come an expected source of funds, that it was a group that was just not very active in most of the parts of the state. That is just the same folks showing up sort of to check the box of attending a meeting. So when I think about that, and I think about all the other sort of scenarios that, you know, Jay just walked about, who's me doing what, there's something missing from all of those, and it's the employer perspective. So under WIOA, we're supposed to be serving with each fervor the employer needs. And so if we don't have a dynamic group that is not just meeting for the sake of meeting, but trying to solve all employers' challenges, and only employers can be at the table to articulate that. Employers are not going to tolerate showing up for a meeting just to show up for a meeting. So as soon as you get an environment that is the case, you lose the employers, you lose the input. But so whoever and wherever, you know, we just have to make sure that we continue to keep employers needs equal fervor as the employee. And I think if start with that and finish with that, the system that's functioning.
Awesome. I think Mike and Candace, you each had something you were going to weigh in.
Yeah, I'll just be quick. You know, Nancy summed up a lot of the advantages to that, you know, about a sector strategy and stuff. You know, we had just a couple comments that you made. You know, I was the director of a multi-county, 6-county area, very rural area of Pennsylvania, and we didn't make it the entire workforce board. We actually studied the way people work and lived and broke our sector strategies out there, because it allowed the employers, both public sector as well as private sector, to talk about their skill sets and aggregate their demand, and also for the supply side. So, you know, we had a lot of those other groups that also met, and you know, we certainly like to invite them into the tent, if you will. And as Nancy said, you know, it just grows over time, and you can allow that to develop. I can talk a little more about that, but that's just, you know, it doesn't, you know, it's just an opportunity to bring folks together. And I think, as you had mentioned before, you know, it does create some great efficiencies and confidence and trust among everybody. And then it just, you know, grows, you know. But if they know from the leadership side that this is our preferred way of doing business, then it, you know, it hopefully creates some greater efficiencies, so you don't have all the same people switching chairs to go to all the different meetings. It's a good idea to think about.
Yeah, I think the geographic overlay of a lot of these things, Jay, that you were talking about, I think that's a key component. And whether it's by labor force or regional economy of scale, there's a lot that we can be doing in that space. And that's what we'll do in this next phase as we make design recommendations. I think we could probably, I'm trying to think that, you know, there's other things we could talk about, like thinking about, again, sort of the components and what might be part of a system redesign. You know, there's obviously, we heard a lot about data and the requisite MOUs for sharing and matching data sets along the way. I think what we want to do some investigation into some of the maybe examples where regions and states have overcome some of those data sharing challenges, to hold up as an example for some of the ways that you know, some of these hitting these larger outcome oriented goals and aspirations could be captured. But I think, Jay, you made a comment there about communication. I think that's also a key piece too. And what sometimes it's, even if things are happening, it's like, what are the structural pieces that are set in place to be almost like that signifier, right? So, you know, we know that there's collaboration happening in the governor's office, but is there a structure that can be held up and made visible to say, like, here is how it is formalized, and here's how this group in this context is held accountable for some of these agency collaborations. Cool. Okay. But you get the gist of where we're going. So the next phase that we need to do is what we are proposing is that we'll do a brief looking at some of these key, you know, across those 5 areas of infrastructure, of data, 5 that you just saw. And then we, the PCG team, we're going to go back and look at some of the best practices in those areas that really stood out as opportunities for Vermont to make some reforms. And so I just generated here is a quick list. You know, these were some of these were states referenced in your RFP. Some of them are just others that we offer as a potential areas of exploration. But you can see, I think in any case, we're going to need to be looking across for examples of national best practice and benchmarks based on how their workforce governance system is designated. If it is a single state board, or if it's some of these smaller area or larger areas, but that have demarcated local workforce areas like Maine, for example. Maine has a lot more people though. So, you know, so there's trade-offs inherent in all these. But then looking at, you know, population as distributed across areas, just getting at some of the points that have been raised around people being distributed into rural areas, thinking about, you know, age and migration patterns. And then I think also we want to leave room for just innovative practices that might not necessarily correspond to the same statewide characteristics, but might be something worth thinking about. So for example, you know, Nancy talked about workforce cabinets. The state of Kentucky has an education and workforce cabinet, but they're also part of a careers continuum. And so what do some of those structures look like, and how might that be something useful to think about, even though it's not a direct, you know, state characteristic match per se. Okay. So then that sets us up for June 5th. So prior to the meeting, we will send you a brief that kind of walks you through some of the rationale for some of the benchmarking states that we've included, some early ideas, you know, so some of that evidence will be organized, as well as some early ideas for Vermont's consideration, a little bit more in depth, obviously, than what we had time to do today. And then what we'd like to do is use that time on the 5th in person to really talk about how do we assess the pluses and the minuses for some of these proposed changes. You know, what's this group kind of going to use as criteria for making these kinds of assessments? So for example, if it feels like something that was done before, is that a plus or a minus? You know, I mean, we can talk about that as a group and sort of figure out what's the community, what's the appetite for some things? Does it have to feel totally different in order for people to buy in? Or is there enough of a constituency that appreciated how something was done before and want it brought back, but with, you know, sustained resources to enable it to kind of come to its full fruition of whatever that structure was. So I think that would be my proposal for that kind of dialogue that we would structure on the 5th, really kind of getting into some of these more, I guess, values and perspective conversations. So, and the trade-offs inherent with some of these changes. And then I think building upon the June 5th conversation, then we would come back to you. We would take that information, come back to you at the end of June with a better draft of some recommendations that have been more refined. Jay.
I think in these discussions, it'll be really important for us to, you know, kind of reflect on what is it going to take to make X happen, or what is it going to take to make Y happen? Yeah. And part of that would be, you know, what can we influence of entities that are not state government? Yep. Will there be some required behavior change or some practice changes, and what do those look like? And if we ultimately come to the conclusion of, here's a long list of things that are going to have to change, and we say that, okay, that's fine, we accept that, then we also have to think through, what does the change management plan look like for that? Because I don't think any of us want this to be a document that we all are admiring a problem, but don't make a commitment to follow through and hold each other and other organizations accountable to get to the change that we know we need to make.
Sort of like we need a transition plan.
Yes. But we need to be able to tell people this is what it's going to take for us to get here, and remind them frequently in meetings, you're experiencing this pain or this frustration because you're still not doing, you know, what we all agree needs to be done.
Gosh, this sounds very familiar, like maybe on something we're voting on tomorrow. Transitions, and they're expensive.
Yes.
And they're hard.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, so having thought through a little bit like the initial outline, I think what we can do on our end is sort of frame out like, okay, here's some like easier next low level steps, and here are the longer term, more ambitious elements. And I think, I'll send the slides after the meeting. Yes, Kendall. But I think, yeah, that kind of begs the question though, is like, okay, what goes along with it? And this is the kind of conversation that's probably easier if we have in person and can really have that kind of depth. But yeah, I totally agree with you, Jay. I appreciate that comment, because that was often a question we asked a lot of people we interviewed. It was kind of like, where do you think there is the will to make whatever change it is that was, being discussed, or desire for a different set of contexts. So totally noted. I guess that's everything that we were hoping to offer by way of update today. I think in terms of next steps, I'll follow up with you individually, just to refine, revise, but I think we've gotten a lot of critical mass of feedback. So I just want to smooth that out so we can close that and really focus on the design piece going forward, which we'll double down on in May, June, and July. All right.
Laudable.
Okay.
Do we think, I mean, I hate to say this, but do we think 2 hours is sufficient time in June if we're going to make the effort to get together in person? I would boldly propose, if you're coming up here, or if anybody's coming here, 2 hours will just begin to sort of scratch the surface. I don't think that's enough time. It does strike me as a modest meeting for all the effort.
Right.
Well, maybe when we come for that meeting, if we can plan on possibly staying longer if we need to, if things are progressing and we're really working hard and not at the we're not there in 2 hours, I don't have a problem with staying on. And if we start at noon, we could continue to go on to if we need to 3 or 4 o'clock, if we needed to. Does that work for everyone?
Yes.
I think it probably works for those of us who are here in Vermont, but if people are coming in from out of state, I think they're the ones that's part of why I ask. If it's going to be in person and people are coming here, obviously they need to plan on a time frame.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I think at the very beginning of the project, Abby was awesome, and we kind of threw a bunch of dates on the calendar to just as placeholders. And I think right now that Abby's instincts were on point in terms of like where we would be at this phase. So I think, I'm glad we're having this conversation, and we can definitely, I think, among a subset of this group, figure out who could be there longer.
and if it's too early, I mean, if we're slightly off track, is that too soon for that meeting? I mean, just because we committed to it doesn't mean we can't.
I think that gives us a whole month to really synthesize a lot of information that's kind of been out there. It may not look perfect for our discussion, but I think a month from now, we'll have some things to talk about. And it'll be good to get your feedback. I always like to get client feedback earlier rather than later, because then if there are things that, if necessary, we can always find another time to get back together if we don't get it all done in June. But I think if we have some kind of depth early in June, I think that would be good, because then we hit the 4th of July shortly thereafter. So
Would it make sense to start earlier in the day than at noon, if people can?
Yeah, I think that would be good. I mean, depending on if people are coming from out of state, they need to coordinate their travel plans. But I can be available from like 10 to 4 that day, so, or 10 to 5. So-
As Massachusetts representative, I can make that an earlier meeting as well.
I can also arrange whatever we decide on if we want to do a day-long summit type event.
Me too.
Okay. Well, I guess, leave it up to you, Alicia, on how everyone can get here.
Yep.
For everyone, and I guess we could start at 10 o'clock on the 5th instead of noon.
Great. That's nice too, because then it gives us a couple of ways to break up and not have to feel compelled to go straight through.
Right.
Okay. Excellent.
Okay, so let's plan on 10 o'clock and we'll see how far we can go.
Excellent.
Okay. Sounds good. I'll just make sure that my committee room is not being used and we can use that. I
And
think
if
that,
not, there are lots of options.
yeah, there's other committee rooms we could use, so.
And how many are we gonna be? Because our committee rooms are a little constrained, so we should find out how many people we're actually gonna be in person and
Yep.
what. And sort of choose accordingly.
Okay.
I mean,
I-
I have 11 people in my table, so.
I also have a conference room here at Labor.
State House labor, you lose.
Okay.
But well, we have our team meets, our work team meets tomorrow, so we'll be able to nail down those logistics for you all, so we can find the appropriate room.
Okay. Sounds good.
Awesome. Okay. Well, it's good to see you all. Good luck at the last days of session, right? You're supposed to be winding down.
I hope so.
Well, no, we're just winding up. So we have to wind up before we can wind down.
Yeah.
We're
Well,
doing
we
that
haven't-
right now.
We haven't been called back to the floor yet, so
Yeah,
it's going to be a long night tonight, I think.
Ew.
Well, thank you guys. And I'm glad you didn't require us to have actually read this whole thing because
No.
I just printed it out 2 minutes ago. So I will have read this by June 5th. And anything else you have to send us.
Perfect. We just wanted to entice you. This was sort of the,
So, and Alicia, you and I still haven't met because I didn't actually get done with meetings here until 6 o'clock. So on Friday. So
Yeah.
I'm happy to reschedule anytime after this weekend.
Absolutely. You have my cell phone. Just text me when it's good.
I do? Okay.
Yeah. I'll send it to you again.
Send it to me again. That would be
Okay.
great. I think I'm the only one, sadly, who hasn't met with you.
It's in time. Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you. Are we done?
Well, I think so. I don't think, is there any public comment? Is there anyone that's joined us?
Just
So,
thanks to the House of Representatives for passing the apprenticeship language.
And thanks to the Senate
the
Rules
Senate's
Committee
going to
for
do it
getting it
today
out of
or tomorrow.
rules.
Rules Committee, getting it done.
It'll be
We
done
are-
tomorrow.
It may get an award for the fastest bill through the State House this session.
Yeah, it was pretty quick.
Good,
Okay.
good teeing it up, Jay and Cam and Mike.
Yep.
We are an awesome team. Okay, thank you.
Good to see y'all.
Okay.
See you.
So thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good afternoon.
you.
Bye. So I would say we're adjourned.
Sounds good.